Okay, great. Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining today's Impact Series webinar from Caseworthy. Again, Artificial Intelligence and Human Services, the Next Frontier. Again, my name is Kelvin McCord. My name is Kelvin McCord, Director of Marketing and Communications with Caseworthy. We're very glad everyone is here and has joined us today. We've got a few housekeeping notes. I'll make some introductions of those you see on the screen, and then we will get started. So a reminder that we are recording this webinar. It will be available on demand on our website within the next probably 24 to 48 hours. So please check that at caseworthy.com, and it is under our resources section. Also, as fairly standard with webinars like this, your microphone and webcam are automatically muted during our presentation. However, we do encourage everyone to participate by posting questions to our two speakers. You can use the Q&A section of the webinar dashboard to do just that. We'll monitor those questions, and hopefully we'll have some time toward the end to be able to share those questions with our presenters. So let's get started. I will start by introducing our presenters, starting with our guest, Dr. Joanne Lamphere. Joanne is a consultant for Metasked, a Caseworthy company. She previously served as the Deputy Commissioner of Person-Centered Supports at the New York State Office of People with Developmental Disabilities until her retirement in 2018. Her previous roles include serving as a principal at Health Management Associates and as a director of the State Government Affairs Health and Long-Term Care Team at AARP. Joanne earned her doctorate in public health at Columbia University, and we're very glad she's here today. Also, our webinar host, Doug Golub, serves as Senior Vice President and General Manager for Metasked and Medicaid Services at Caseworthy, focusing his expertise and passion on delivering innovative technology solutions to the healthcare and human services industry. Prior to joining Caseworthy, Doug served as president of Metasked and as platform services manager for Microsoft's Health Solutions Group. An original member of Microsoft's healthcare venture, Doug is an expert in healthcare IT security, implementations, and client needs assessments. He is a frequent conference speaker on topics that include AI and serves on the Anchor Foundation Board of Directors as treasurer and the Access AI Committee. And Doug holds a master's in information systems from Rochester Institute of Technology. So with that, I will turn it over to Doug and Joanne.
Thanks so much, Kelvin, and thanks everyone for being here. This is an exciting time. Artificial intelligence is exciting, and it comes with huge opportunities and also risks, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So we'll get started by talking about what artificial intelligence actually is, what is natural language processing and sentiment analysis, and then we'll be diving into how these tools can help improve lives for people receiving supports and also for their circles of support. We'll be applying this innovative technology in a field that's been drowning in paperwork for way too long, and also see some opportunities for AI to address health equity. And of course, no conversation about artificial intelligence in 2023 is appropriate without diving into the risks and the considerations. So what is it? Well, we've been hearing about artificial intelligence for decades, right? It was 1968 that the book and the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey comes out, and it sort of brings us into the future, of course. Of course, that future now was about 20 years ago, but it brings us into the future. It brings us into what happens when the machines learn and what the possibilities are, but also some of the risks of taking some instructions a little bit too literally and what that could mean for all of us. And so it's sort of kind of interesting that this was supposed to take place in 2001. Here we are in 2023. And fortunately, not everything played out the way the movie did, but there are some risks ahead, and that's what we're here to talk about. What is it? Well, artificial intelligence, it's technology that enables computers to mimic humans' behaviors. The main difference between some of the traditional artificial intelligence and the generative artificial intelligence really has to do with capabilities and applications. Traditional AI was primarily used to analyze data, make predictions, while generative, which is what we know today, goes a step further and it creates new data similar to its original training data. So machine learning is a really important part of the techniques that we use through the technologies that we have. That deep learning is based on how our human brain works and trying to further mimic it. Today in particular, we'll be looking at natural language processing, and this is the ability to listen and to read and to scan text and be able to process that large amount of information using natural language just as we are today through speaking and through the supports that we offer to many of the individuals that we support. And natural language processing is a really important component of artificial intelligence, but not all of it. We're also going to take a look at sentiment analysis. And this is an approach where we can read and listen. Specifically, we'll be looking at service plans and service notes and help identify the emotional tone behind a body of text. And we'll find some really interesting applications that can help support people to live the best lives that they choose. When we look at attributes and applications of artificial intelligence, like I said, it mimics how the human brain works. So it needs to learn, it needs to reason, it needs to problem solve, it needs to perceive, and it needs to use language. And this fits into a couple of key buckets. One is image recognition. You'll notice some of those pictures that we have throughout today were created by AI, so it can recognize and generate that. Those photos of us at the beginning were in fact not us. They were artificial intelligence versions of us. There's also the components around speech and sound, music, other speech and text. So much of what we do in the world of human services, social services, healthcare services has to do with documenting our assessments, our plans, our notes. And being able to recognize and read through that is more than a full-time job. And there's some huge opportunities for artificial intelligence to assist in all of that recognition. There's also applications for robotics and any combinations of all of the above. So it's an exciting time and it's an exciting world. We will be looking at sentiment analysis in particular today. And this is some of the machine learning that can be most used in human services. Metasked is now a case-worthy company, and we've been in existence for over 20 years, meaning that we have over 20 years of extremely secure data, service notes, plans, assessments, incidents for each of the individuals that are supported for those that have been using the software for that long or that have loaded it in through historical backloads. And with that, there's an opportunity to go back and take a look at that and identify trends, what's positive, what's negative, what's neutral. This is what the sentiment analysis tools actually do. And there's actually on the website and through that QR code, you can play along with some of the tools that we're going to be using today by making up notes and seeing how they're scored positively, negatively, and neutral. Just be careful not to put any real protected health information into the demonstrative tool. So we talk about artificial intelligence and we talk about the public interest in artificial intelligence. And if you're like me, you've probably been noticing you're hearing an awful lot about artificial intelligence, and you have to wonder, is it just my news feeds that I get, which by the way are also some artificial intelligence, or is everybody hearing more about artificial intelligence? So thanks to our friends at Google Trends, we were able to go back over the last 5 years and see news searches, news stories and searches. And what we see here is there were probably an average of about 8 to 10 news stories a week or searches when it came to artificial intelligence. And then something wild happened at the end of 2022. And at the time of this recording today, it is now September of 2023. So about 8.5 months later, something big happened where we've been seeing an awful lot about AI. In fact, the number of news stories that are hitting our social media, the number of stories hitting the newspapers and radio and television and other ways that we communicate have increased 12-fold. So something big's happened. There's been a big growth in artificial intelligence, which is probably why you're here on today's webinar, and we're really glad that you are here. And we want to make sure that whatever is big and whatever is happening doesn't leave the services that we provide behind. We've been left behind before in human services and social services when it comes to technology, funding, visibility, inclusion. And we want to make sure with these great new opportunities that are ahead, we don't get left behind again. So when it comes to social services, have we been seeing a news spike like artificial intelligence has? Well, the answer is no. We have not been seeing the same kind of spike in interest and in news, but that's okay. It's really important that we are able to provide the services and supports that we do. We don't need a spike in visibility like artificial intelligence does, but we need to do the best we can for the people that we support. And so why now? What is it that happened in the past year that has made AI so interesting? And what does it really mean for us and the work that we all do? Well, as you can see there, Rosie from the Jetsons was supposed to be already providing direct supports by now, but that hasn't exactly happened, which is probably a good thing. Math and computer scientists have been researching and developing algorithms for over 70 years. Our society has more data in electronic format than ever before. Case in point, the work that we do here at Caseworthy and Metascata Caseworthy Company. And we can finally train and access all that data to train the models. Computing power has grown exponentially from a computer like the one you see there on the screen to the one you're hopefully using today. I'm imagining you're not watching the webinar from a computer that looks like that. Major technology companies are in a race to develop, test, evaluate, and fine-tune and launch AI applications. But what's really done it is that some of these tools and applications are actually within reach. We can access them from our own homes, from our own pockets. And this started probably with something like Roomba back in 2002. And if you don't remember what Roomba is, it was that really cool vacuum cleaner. And there, I'm going to clean my screen right now. What made it artificial intelligence, what made it generative artificial intelligence, was that it had the ability to go across your home and identify that there are walls here, that there is a table here, that there's a pile of laundry over there. And it could take in all those data points, analyze them, and generate a plan for how it was going to go and clean your room. And if you were lucky, it went back to its base when it was done. And if you had a cat, it now suddenly had an amusement park in your own house. But that was one of the first tools that made it into our homes that was artificial intelligence. And not all technology is artificial intelligence, right? You have something like an electric toothbrush. It turns on, it turns off. Maybe if you're lucky, it has a second button and maybe you don't even know what that does. But it doesn't actually learn. It does exactly what the technology is supposed to do. Whereas something like a Roomba, it learned, it changed what it was doing based on the information that it was that it was learning on, that it was training on. Similarly, tools like Waze for driving around comes out in 2006. Siri comes out in 2011. Alexa, and I'm sorry if I made everybody's house Alexas go off right now, comes out in 2014, where it has skills that it can learn and it can be trained. And these were really, really big things that came into our homes that made artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence a possibility. But the thing that made the news go off the charts at the end of last year was ChatGPT. And so I can't see if you're raising your hands, but I'm imagining that many folks have heard of ChatGPT. And I'm imagining that if I asked, does anybody know what ChatGPT stands for? You probably don't, but you'd probably have to Google it. So what is it? It stands for Generative Pre-training Transformer. So going along with artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence, it's actually able to be trained on information, much like that Roomba, and transform that information and generate something new as a result of it. It's different than, say, a Google, which is able to go out and search and find something that already exists. This artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, generative AI, it generates something new that didn't exist before. It doesn't find something that's already there, and that's a big deal. Specifically, how can it improve the lives of the people receiving supports and their circles of supports? And when we take a look at some of the biggest policy challenges of our time and opportunities of our time, we can hopefully show what we here at Metascata Caseworthy Company are doing and what's possible for the next couple of weeks, months, and years ahead. And so with that, we have Joanne to talk about some of the biggest policy challenges of 2023.
Thank you, Doug. Let's consider some of these major policy and administrative challenges that are currently facing the human services field. And when we think of human services, we're thinking about the fields of intellectual and developmental disabilities, aging, behavioral health, housing, prison re-entry, and so forth. We're thinking globally, not narrowly. And perhaps, I would argue the most significant challenge facing our field is the workforce crisis. And never has the workforce crisis been so severe across the United States, with turnover, retirements, low wages, difficult working conditions, and in fact, dangerous working conditions. The workforce crisis is just threatening the entire human services field. The issue of caregiving infrastructure. We don't have enough caregivers, paid or unpaid, and the job of caregiving is often backbreaking and limitless. So how do we support the caregivers, both paid and unpaid? Equity for the people we support. There are considerable disparities we would have to recognize if we were being honest with each other. There are considerable differences in how people are served based on their race, their ethnicity, their geographic location, urban, rural, family, socioeconomic status. How can we do better in terms of assuring equity? There's the Medicaid access rule, which is a over 500 pages of proposed rules that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services issued last spring. And it's causing state agencies and provider agencies to be in a whirlwind. The requirements on states are significant in terms of home and community-based services access, payment rate transparencies, payment of direct care workers, compilation of wait lists and meeting standards, and so forth. The states are not sure how they're ever going to meet these important access rules. The issue of equity for staff, about how to prevent discrimination, overcome biases, fair pay, and of course, the unwinding of the public health emergency from COVID and redeterminations of Medicaid eligibility. These are the challenges we believe are the overarching challenges facing the human services field. And in this webinar, we want to stress that AI tools, artificial intelligence, can assist our staff and the people we support to meet these challenges.
Thanks, Sean. So how can it be useful? I'll give you a couple of ways that it cannot be useful, and that's with photos like these, but you get the idea here that it's generative. These are not actually us. We did not go to outer space. By the end of this webinar, you may think otherwise, but we did not. AI has the ability to take information that it knows and information that can be that it can gather and learn, and it can basically help with creating things that are new. When we think about the people that we support across social and human services, how AI can help us is pretty critical here. So this slide's a little bit funny, but let's get to some of the real things. It can augment our home and community-based services through images and video, virtual reality devices to help people experience life that they may not be able to otherwise or immediately experience, learning how to travel, learning how to socialize in different ways that weren't so accessible before. Explore interests, speech and sound, being able to work on our communication skills, helping with loneliness, which is one of the biggest mental health challenges facing us, I'd argue before COVID, but especially since the public health emergency. Texts and narratives, and we'll be looking at natural language processing today, predictive analytics, and biometrics, all of our wearables, helping to identify health, welfare, and safety, seizure monitors, and other fluid intake and elimination logs, helping to augment the work that we do so that we can live the lives we want to live. And so we start by a conversation about assisting in generating person-centered plans. And there are some really, really great technologies today, but also really great processes and decades of people studying and working and learning to help people to live their best lives. And so here's a simple example of someone named Sally, who lists out what's important to her and what's important for her. She loves her family at Thanksgiving, her grandmother, her mom, her fans. She loves to act and sing and dance. And she loves learning. She uses ASL to communicate. She also really enjoys creative writing, Greek mythology. You get to understand a picture of Sally, but a picture on a piece of paper, a two-dimensional piece of paper, certainly doesn't tell you enough about who Sally is, but it's a start. And so this is some of how we do the planning process today to map out a person and what's meaningful to that person in their life and what's possible. And so what's possible with assisted artificial intelligence? There are opportunities to listen and learn from a person and be able to make recommendations that previously would have not been possible because of the limitations of the interdisciplinary team, the service coordinator, some of the possibilities of the lived experiences, not knowing what we don't know, what's possible out there. AI can help with recommendations that previously may not have been possible. Now, by no means is it a replacement for the person-centered planning process. The first and most important reason is these AI technologies don't necessarily involve the person at all. They read, they learn, they understand. It is not a replacement for person-centered planning, but it's a huge way to augment and to assist. So we're going to take a look at some examples, some real examples. And when you are working with these examples, we have a whole section later today that talks about security. You have to be super careful about not providing any protected health information to any of these online tools, that, especially those that you don't have business associate agreements and other components with. So today we'll be using some de-identified data to show you how it's done. Now, here's a lot of text on the screen, but here's a quick example. On the left side here, we study an individual for a month, and we study some of the services that this individual receives. We have within a lab environment without access to the internet except for us to be able to go in there. We have it learn and train and read through a period of service notes, and this is just 1 month for one service. You'd say that's not going to tell you anything you need to know about a person, but in fact it is. So, and of course, with large data sets, you can do a lot more than that. So we study this person for November 2022. She's rehearsing for the play Bye Bye Birdie. Of course, it's also November, so there's a lot of Thanksgiving and family activities going on. And you get to learn a lot about this person. And then you can have it generate a periodic summary. It could be a monthly summary, a quarterly summary, a summary as appropriate. And this is some of the work that we've been doing, because in this period of time with high staffing turnover, of course, we would love for the staff to each be able to have the opportunity to go back and read every single thing and talk to every single person about the individual that they're supporting, most importantly, the person themselves. However, time is of the essence, and being able to summarize a significant amount of notes, and we can see this happen in a few seconds. Being able to see that this person was rehearsing for a musical, and engaged in educational activities, interactive activities and games, other things like that. To be able to generate these summaries really helps staff to be able to have additional tools in their hands to provide the best supports they possibly can and to get to know the person. It's just an additional tool to help. So reading, learning, generating those summaries, and also for the point of today, we asked it a question. This is a question that comes from the Charting the Life course. One of the core questions, which is, what recommendations do you have for this person to develop a vision of a good life? Think about what they need to know and do, identify how to find or develop supports, and discover what it takes to live the lives they want to live. And based on the information that we fed it, which was just a month of service notes, which was not nearly enough, it recognized some of the self-reflection and goal setting, passion discovery, given her participation in Bye Bye Birdie. Maybe this person may want to pursue acting, singing, dancing, or even a backstage production. Broaden their artistic skills, diversify their knowledge, work on some of these life skills, money, math skills, finance workshops. For those of us that have been working with individuals, writing plans, working with plans for months, years, or decades, you start to realize here that by learning and training, it's making some really good recommendations. Creating a vision board, helping to journaling. These are really helpful things that we've been doing in the service coordination process for decades. It will never replace the work that we do, but it sure gives us some really good ideas and places to think about looking and helping. And that makes a big difference, that in the busy lives that all of our staff have, any tools that we can get to help us to do a better job, to use our time more effectively, and to be able to spend more time with the person, focusing on that person, those are tools worth having. And that's why we're excited about what artificial intelligence can do. We've just shown it here in the planning process. We're also going to show sentiment analysis. And now sentiment analysis is basically able to tell how positive, how negative a given note is, a given plan is, a given incident is. Here's an example of a positive one. And these are based on true people that have been de-identified. So this person independently exercised using the bike pedals for 20 minutes. He was verbally prompted to use the computer to look up his area of interest, and he researched trains. He He was verbally prompted to speak clearly while talking and work on better posture. Staff praised him on a great job, and he smiled and he said, "I try for you," and he laughed. And so when we have artificial intelligence reading that, it's able to come up with a score. And by the way, these scores, these algorithms, they weren't invented for human services. They weren't invented for Metascat or for Caseworthy. They were originally invented for things like Yelp, for a restaurant owner to know if somebody wrote a good review or a bad review. But we've applied those same technologies and those same tools to be able to look at a service that an individual receives. And here's just one service one day. Of course, services are also negative, right? This person, different person, arrived at his program on time. He was prompted to be socially appropriate with his peers, but he refused. He became frustrated and verbally aggressive towards his staff. He was asked to stop and talk about what was making him upset, but he refused. He became verbally and physically aggressive towards his peer. He was restrained. He eventually calmed down and talked about what upset him. And these come off of real notes. Unfortunately, the real note never told us what actually upset him. But you can see that this is all in all a negative note. And so the concept that we've put together here at Metascat and Caseworthy is, can we chart these over time? Can we identify inflection points for people? And some of the things that we learned is over the course of a given day, over the course of a given hour, over the course of a 10-minute period, people are both positive, negative, neutral, and everywhere in between. However, when we start looking over time, we can trend. And so here's an example, and there is a QR code so you can play along and type a note and see how it gets scored. Here's an example of looking at a male in his early 50s. For the purpose of today, his name is Joe. This is based on a true story for a person whose name is not Joe. So if you look at this, there's some seasonal things going on here. What's happening to him every autumn? And why did it stop? And so we have the ability, all these data points that you see here come from the combination of lots and lots of daily service notes, checking the sentiment. And the score here that you can see goes from 0 to 1. 1 is the most positive, 0 is the least positive. And you definitely see some big fluctuations. Something's going on here. And this is particularly helpful for a team, for an individual, for circles of support, for staff, to identify inflection points, be able to help make corrections when things are trending down, and help celebrate when things are trending up. So what happened here? Well, what we find is at the end of the summer each year, he starts to worry. He lives in a cold climate in the north, and he starts to worry because his parents, they leave for Florida, and it's a big stressor for him. And you can see it. You can see what happens when they're gone. He does get better and back to more positive again, you know, starting in January, knowing that they'll be coming back. But this happens every year. So what happens in 2020? Well, spoiler alert, you can probably imagine what happens in 2020. In 2020, the parents go to Florida, but they stay there. They don't come back. They go there because of COVID, and they permanently resettle there. He's in his early 50s, so you have to figure the parents are probably older than their 50s and have decided to move to a warmer climate. And the impact here showed. So here's just a quick example of how you can see how artificial intelligence, natural language processing, sentiment analysis can help us look at the notes we've already been entering for decades in a different way and maybe alert us when we start seeing some ups and downs happening. Here's another example. This person's name is Eugene. He's in his late 70s. And on this one, we've shown the positive components of a note, the negative components of a note. Now, Eugene's axis goes from minus 30%, so 30% negative, to plus 50% positive. That's Eugene's swing here. And as we start taking a look in 2020, we're seeing Eugene, he's up and down in every day for each of us, right? We all have good days and bad days, up and down, but we start to see that the trend is heading not necessarily in the right direction. And then we start to see that it's improved. Hindsight's 2020. It's much easier to look back on this and be able to see. What we do live is be able to identify when these trends are moving down before we have to look back 2 years to see it. But to illustrate how it works, this was one time in September of 2020 where he fell in the shower, he hurt his hip. This was clear in the service notes, and it made a big jump down from how he was doing in August to how he was doing in September. He started doing better, but he had a pain in his left side. That's what happens when you fall in the shower and hurt your hip and you're 70 years old. There's some other instances. There are some behavioral health needs for this individual, some triggers for this individual. And he was hitting, cursing his housemates. Again, we see in the notes yelling at the housemates, and these are some of the pieces that, when captured in the service notes, contribute to some of the negative sentiment. Cursing, throwing bottles at his housemates, he injured his foot. These are all things that happen for individuals, and contributing to the downward trend that we saw. But luckily, we're getting to an inflection point here. And the doctor reduced the Haldol because of some of the side effects, and he was also having Parkinson-like movements. So in this particular case, the medication changes. And so as the medication changes, this is the result we all want to see from a medication change. For the purpose of today, we see a positive outcome from a medication change. I think we all know it doesn't always look like this, but for Eugene today, it does, and he's based on a real person. He was able to reconnect with his nephew, and having those social interactions and family connections means a lot to him. He was, look at all this green positivity that we're seeing. We weren't really seeing that before. He's still occasionally screaming, throwing, having mood issues. He does have some significant behavioral health needs, and being able to support Eugene in the way that Eugene chooses is critical, and the staffing turnover that we've been through hasn't exactly been helpful. But we do see that he's trending in the right direction, and that's been particularly helpful. And so here's a story of, it's more than just the medication, of course, but that was probably the biggest change for Eugene, and we can see it in the service notes. We didn't ask the staff to go back to 2020 and do anything differently. We read the notes that were already there and used natural language processing to help chart what's happened to Eugene over this period of time, just from the notes alone. Here's another example. And here's one for Sean. And you don't need to be a data scientist to look at this graph and know that something happened here in 2022. So one of the big things that we see throughout this is some stability. He's up and he's down, but let's take a look by looking at the actual notes themselves to understand why they generated scores like they did. And everybody here can try that QR code if you like, and type in your own notes and see how they'd get scored. So we do see here that Sean, has had some negative experiences over some periods of time. Throughout the service notes, it's fairly clear that Sean struggles with his obesity. He has mobility issues. He can't get out and do the things he wants to do. From reading all of his notes, he seems to be an extremely positive person. And you can see every one of these notes is 50, 60, 70, 80, 90% positive. But he can't get out and do the things he wants to do. He does have vascular necrosis developing on his legs. And this is not only painful, but certainly that Sean a male in his 40s is aware of. Every single one of his notes just about starts by saying that he's supposed to be on a low salt diet. And if you read the rest of the notes, he's not on this low salt diet, but he's an adult, and the dignity of risk means that Sean can do whatever he wants to do, but he certainly is reminded of his low salt diet. He's also supposed to be out exercising, doctor's orders. It doesn't mean that he is, and if you read his notes, it's fairly clear that he's not doing the kind of exercising that his physicians would like him to do, but he's an adult and it's his life. And he's aware. He's certainly made aware in every one of those service notes. So you start to see, and he's extremely positive person, but we see our first dip. Oh, sorry. Some of these dips here. He burned himself making fried food. He ended up in the hospital, and Sean is in and out of the hospital. We see here in 2020, that his services, well, they've moved to telehealth because this is the public health emergency. And some of those services where people were coming in before and saying, come on, Sean, do you want to go out to the park today? Want to go for a walk? Want to get some exercise? That's a little different when it was happening on FaceTime, right? It's really hard to get somebody to want to go outside on FaceTime. It's possible. But this period of time of some of that social isolation, what we'll find is it probably wasn't the best for a lot of people, especially Sean. So he was hospitalized multiple times. And ultimately here, he ends up several years later needing an amputation below the knee, his vascular necrosis, his diabetes, totally out of control. And that's what contributes to this gigantic dip that you see taking place right here. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, earlier this year, he gets a scooter and he's super excited because he can run errands for his mom again. And for many of us on this call, you might be saying, why didn't we get him a scooter back here? in 2018. Well, hindsight is 2020. And it's really important to see these things, to watch the graphs, to move, to take the information that we already have, that we've been collecting through lots and lots of person-centered interviews, person-centered supports, interdisciplinary team meetings, clinical meetings. It's very different to be able to take all that narrative and see it graphically like this. And it makes a big difference in people's lives, so that hopefully people can have better outcomes than Sean did. And he's doing well now. He probably could be doing better if we could go back in time a bit and maybe get that scooter a little bit sooner, and give him some more options to have the mobility and get out in the community like he wants to. But can only look forward, and we can implement these tools as quickly as possible. So gleaning valuable information from these notes. So we have read through thousands and thousands of notes, and AI has read through even more than that. AI can be used to identify negativity among staff notes. We've identified for several individuals where sometimes the same individual with 3 or 4 different staff members can have vastly different sentiment. The trends over time are the same, but we can see that sometimes it's the staff and how the staff work with individuals. The old expression, if you can't change the staff, change the staff. So there is real potential for real-time predictions for each individual, and that for the future. And we actually have a couple of really good questions. Can we keep adding text to the original documents and then create the summary? Yeah, it just keeps learning and growing. And you can go back, and the summary might change over time. Now, the summary for November 2022 isn't going to change unless you go back and add more notes for November 2022. But there are some rules about contemporaneous notes that sort of come into play there. Can it identify support needs when they change? For example, in the low salt diet, it's not helping. Can the software suggest changes in support? And as of right now, we're pretty heavily reliant on people, but you did see earlier on that it can read these notes and it can make recommendations. And we'll get through some of the risks and some of the concerns later, but this is all what we're going to be seeing happening in the months, quarters, years ahead, and some of it available right now. So we are still drowning in paperwork, and this is a field that's very heavy in it, but that all comes together for how we offer the best supports.
Doug, thank you for an incredibly powerful discussion about how AI can be applied to reading case notes and improving individuals' lives. It's really powerful. But near and dear to my heart, as some of you may know, are the technological and business process changes that can improve the effectiveness of the delivery of human services. I think we'd all agree that there's absolutely no reason on the face of this earth that processing applications for public benefits should take weeks or months. So AI can conquer these delays. It can be a powerful tool that can be harnessed with extraordinary possibilities. So where do we start? One place to start is your own life. Think of how you and your family have adopted AI tools and you haven't even known it. It might have been with the Roomba, it might have been with Siri, but think about that and imagine how you might apply these tools to your professional life. Start imagining. Probably at this moment, the biggest potential benefit of AI is the automation of routine tasks, saving time with data entry. Think of all the data that you enter and re-enter and re-enter. And automation can lead to efficiency so that staff can focus on individuals with more complex needs, and staff can focus on offering value-added services. AI can also reduce delays in service delivery, the long wait times, the language barriers. AI can translate language in real time. You don't have to call up a number and wait 10 minutes, and it happens automatically. Also, AI can improve caseload management, ease care planning, and predict and address high-risk cases. As Doug demonstrated, AI can take large data sets, analyze them, to better tailor services to individuals and personalize recommendations. Of course, in doing all of this, AI will enhance our workforce, eliminating frustration and high staff turnover due to excessive administrative burdens. AI can commit us all to better customer service and a better client experience. Think about telehealth, increased access to services for people who are underserved, language translation, and the enabling devices that are possible, increasing accessibility and reducing dependence on caregivers.
Throughout Joanne's career, she has spent countless hours, both in the aging space and the developmental disability space, across other forms of social services, helping to write policy, write waivers, write these things, thousands and thousands of hours, because this hadn't been invented yet. Sorry, John. But here we are, it's 2023. Here's some opportunities.
And so the next area is another area that's close to my heart, is the design, administration, and modification of Medicaid waivers. Think about all the time and effort that's associated with this responsibility for state and federal agency staff and providers. AI could draft, modify, and report on a Medicaid waiver in less than an hour, in minutes. And this is like amazing when you think about it. Of course, human beings must be at the center of all of this, guiding the content and proofing the materials. But the possibilities are endless.
So with that, we have opportunities for AI to address health equity.
That's right. Health equity is an important societal goal, and AI can be a very important tool in improving health equity. Most important, AI can give voice and joy to participants. It can remove frustrations in communication and substitute in a good way for human connectivity. And the robotics generated by AI certainly can give joy and freedom, as Doug was expressing before. An area of considerable promise, as we've mentioned, is removing service barriers for people, including language and communication. All of the great things we're talking about with AI, we would be remiss if we didn't mention that there remains much concern about potential bias in AI algorithms. Like, what kind of men and women are designing these AI tools, and what are the cultural prejudices that are embedded in themselves? And so designers stress that we must constantly monitor these algorithms and the output. We must constantly monitor. And we can then assure that AI, if it's properly designed, if the tool is properly designed, it can reduce staff and societal prejudices and lead to better service delivery. Of course, no discussion of health equity is complete without talking about the medical transformation that is about to happen, or is even beginning to happen, with AI. It is a huge area of investment. Diagnostics. The diagnostics promises to be the most significant advancement in medical science in years, in terms of the identification of diseases, enhancing the quality of medical treatments, and increasing and improving patient outcomes. It's just astonishing. Medical documentation, it can simplify and ease compilation of, all that paperwork. The other thing that AI can do is eliminate the tons of PDF files for clinicians that they're buried in, trying to find some payer policy or administrative rules. AI can get it for them in seconds. And to bring it back to area of diagnostics, R&D in pharmaceuticals is also a big area of investment, with a lot of potential promise. And so stay tuned with that. All serious artificial intelligence developers recognize the need for human oversight of AI and how it is used. Yet the laws and regulations have not caught up with the pace of AI development. On this slide, you see some examples of emerging plans and possible regulations for AI in the US. And these reports and recommendations include Bill of Rights, testing, data use, discrimination prevention. However, none of these ideas have any teeth yet. No teeth. These are just ideas. And as we go forward, AI designers and potential regulators stress the need for two things. One, adaptable policies. As policies are made at the federal and state levels, they need to be adaptable so that as AI develops, regulation will still be effective. And perhaps more important is governance structure, that a governance structure over AI is needed, such as something like the International Atomic Energy Agency for global oversight of AI. Right now, such an oversight mechanism, public-private partnership, does not exist. And so there's considerable risk in that omission.
Thanks,
Doug,
Joan.
you're next.
And we've had some really good questions in the chat about some of the concerns. Is it ready for prime time? What about permission? Right? I think we all know why the Screen Actors Guild is on strike right now, right? Some of these key things here, some of the images that we've used today. And so there are a lot of concerns. You cannot just do this willy-nilly without significant planning, preparation, and notifications. So fortunately, the Department of Health and Human Services put out a plan on how to do this, what they call patient-centered, what we're calling person-centered outcome research. This was primarily designed for the medical model of supports. However, we don't want to be left behind in the social services that we provide here at Metascat, a Caseworthy company. So some of the key components need to become part of the strategy. They need to become part of, certainly for us, our own policies and procedures here, and certainly the data that we look at. So for example, predictive decision support, right? If this weren't software, or even if it were, for many of the predictive decision support, you would need FDA approval to make some of these recommendations for other types of devices. It's still sort of the Wild West with this artificial intelligence, because as Joanne just mentioned, the laws and the regs haven't exactly caught up yet because something happened very quickly since last December. So we're in a weird period of time here in 2023. And I look forward to watching this presentation again in a year or two from now and see how much has changed, hopefully for the better. But that transparency, the trustworthiness, can you trust it? What about the risks in the models? Is it fair? Is it unbiased? Is it valid? Is it effective? Is it safe? These are all the right questions to be asking at this time. And fortunately, Department of Health and Human Services has put out a pretty comprehensive guide. As Joanne mentioned, the enforcement isn't there yet. There, as Joanne also mentioned, while the White House has put out the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, and certain states have done some things, Congress and other groups haven't necessarily figured out exactly how to tackle this in an appropriate way that lets the benefits of AI shine while protecting people and their rights. And so it's an interesting time to be diving into all of this, that's for sure. So some of those risks and considerations. It's certainly not perfect yet. Here's the slide's a bit humorous, but it makes a point, right? Alexa, how many times do you ask for a song or something and you don't get exactly what you're looking for? And it happens because the technologies are evolving. They're still early, even though we said Alexa's been around for almost 9 years now. All right, and it can have unintended consequences and ethical issues. I think we've all seen the picture of the Pope in a white Balenciaga puffer jacket. Well, he never actually wore that jacket. And this kind of creates some really big ethical challenges, because if we can't believe what we see, what does that mean for a lot of the work that we do and the lives that we live, right? We keep getting phone calls that are spam phone calls. Why would you possibly want to record a voice like mine if you didn't have to? And the answer is to be able to simulate it and make it say things that I never said. All right. And then, of course, some of these friend requests and the spam that we get and some of the scams that we see are some of the risks that come along with it. But there are other risks a little bit more close to home for the individuals that we support, the therapists and the other services that Joanne is going to walk us through.
With the power of artificial intelligence technology comes a broad set of risks. We cannot emphasize enough that we must keep human beings at the center of AI design and its many applications. There are considerable worries about job loss. For example, if an AI model is trained to mimic what a therapist does, who's to say you need a human being at the other end? And this goes on for many jobs in the professional class. We need to be aware that AI models can live forever, but the times and opinions can change, so they can get out of sync with the reality of the world as we're experiencing it today. And with AI, think about ChatGPT. It's just compiling words. It's not thinking about the value behind the words. And so AI personal advice can be deeply unsound. And this generated advice can be harmful and used in unintended ways and should be avoided for now. Also, the threat of misinformation and the transmission of lies with AI is real. And we need to build guardrails to protect society and the individuals we serve. Guardrails for testing, data use, human rights, and so forth. And while we think of what AI can do, and it's all very exciting, at this time, AI models cannot empathize, conceptualize, create, strategize, or feel compassion or joy.
Yeah. And AI will always need those spot checks. That was a good question that we had from before. The American Nurses Association put out their monthly Smart Brief, and in August, there was significant information about AI, about the importance of keeping a human in the loop. Make sure that someone's looking at the output to make sure that it's accurate. For home and community-based services, it really isn't artificial intelligence, it's assisted intelligence. We're not replacing any people, we're giving them additional tools for folks that are already pretty overworked in the first place, to be able to help. It's also really good at being a virtual scribe. Well, somewhat good, as you know what happens when you try to speak to speech to text. It's pretty good at being a virtual scribe and transcribing those notes, and it's helpful with that. And these models, there are plenty of considerations. They do learn over time, and it changes the output based on how much they've learned, just like the human mind does. Remember how we started? Artificial intelligence is technology that mimics the human mind. Well, our minds learn. You can teach an old dog new tricks. And this isn't even that old. From the Kaiser Permanente CIO, I don't think AI is ever going to or should ever replace the personal touch of supports. We are literally in the people business. And if you take the people out of that business, then it's a very different environment we'll all be living in.
So when you think about all of this in terms of the promises of artificial intelligence and the risks, rather than run away in fear or bury our heads in the sand, what can we do now in our own personal and professional lives to learn more so that we can adopt and adapt models to improve the delivery of human services? The first thing is that it's important that we advocate for sponsoring pilot projects, funding research, learning from that, and then scaling up. We want to implement policies for data use, best practices, deletion of information, privacy and notification, and so forth. And these policies can change over time. As we mentioned, we need to start somewhere. And as technicians would say, start with low risk, high reward applications. That's the place to start, not a place of high risk. Also, I encourage you to serve on advisory councils and set up work groups within your professional communities to discuss these issues, to learn, and to advocate for important policies and programs. We need to build containers. Now, a container, I would say that all models are not for public use. And we need to be thoughtful in what to include in an enterprise search capability. And for some of the populations that we serve, an enclosed model with approved content is a much safer application than just public models. We need to invest in training, both training the models and training the people who will use the tools. It's important that we monitor constantly. Is the model working as intended? We need feedback mechanisms and adjustments. We need to guard against unanticipated behavior, such as the idea that pathogens can develop and rip through a city. What are some of the nefarious flaws in these models? What are some of the catastrophic risks? We need to always be monitoring so that we can promote trust in use and use AI as a tool that will benefit humankind.
Definitely. And we happen to be lucky here at Metasget and Caseworthy Company. We have a security team that understands and takes the extra effort to know the products really well, know the clients, know the markets. They make that a first priority. And they've been really helpful in identifying what's out there. Here's one tool. This is kind of a fun one that everybody can play with, nutrition-facts.ai. It's a label that no one's really using yet, but they should be. And it's influenced our own policies here at Caseworthy to be able to do all the things that you saw today in a safe way. Specifically, within the next several months and years, we know whether it'll come from either best practice or legislation or regulation, that organizations will have to report how they're doing AI, the secret sauce behind it. And as every one of us as individuals, working at organizations, working with individuals, being members of society, this is a good thing to have that transparency. So specifically, what model are you using? Is it ChatGPT? Is it OpenAI? Is it something else? Are you training it with real customer data that has sensitive information in it? Does OpenAI need to know that someone is HIV positive? Does OpenAI need to know that someone struggles with depression? Does OpenAI need to know that someone has an obesity diagnosis? The answer is no, they probably don't. But are you training your base model with real customer data? Is that customer data and the data that is the data in everybody's database? Is the customer data being shared with that vendor with whom nobody has a business associate agreement? I would hope not, right? Is the data being anonymized before it is being sent to any of these tools? Here at the Metasget and Caseworthy world, most of the work that we've been doing has been in-house, not sending it out. So it all exists within our world. Is there a human paying attention to make sure that this isn't garbage? How long do you delete it when you're done with it? Or does it sit there on the server forever and is a potential risk to be hacked later? I think you hopefully all know the answer to that one. How long do you keep that data for? Are you logging and auditing every single thing that you're doing? Are there guardrails? Is there input and output consistency? And like I said, we here at Caseworthy have been really lucky with a security team that makes it their first priority to know the software, know the clients, know the work that we do, and they've helped to guide us in this right direction. We're imagining that every organization, whether a state government, a social services organization, other software vendors out there, other partners, will each have to ask themselves these questions. And it's a series of questions we haven't necessarily had before. Go back to all of your old contracts. How many of them even reference AI usage? Probably not many. Fast forward a year or two, or hopefully even less. How many of them will? Probably most. So it's an exciting time to be getting into it, but these are some of the key considerations that are out there. There are also, Rachel Hilton, great question. There are also spam and malware out there that can absolutely get in. One of the things that we've noticed in training some of these models is if we don't delete the data, if we don't constantly take a look at what it's learned, there can be bleeding from one person. Then by bleeding, I mean information that the brain learns, that the AI learns, can go from one person to the next. It can recommend services that don't exist in that person's locality because it just learned about it from training on someone else's data. And so that's why the logging, the guardrails, they're critically important. They're important so that the quality of what comes in and what goes out is actually useful. And AI is not a threat, but actually a critical component for offering better services and supports to the people that we support. And so here are some of the possibilities for the next frontier to be able to actually go in, and some things that we're working on here at Metascat, a Caseworthy company. And Caseworthy, health diagnosis and events, being able to pick up on things that a human might not, because these AI bots have a lot more time to read these things, and they work a lot faster than we do. Detecting fraud, waste, abuse, and neglect, identifying unmet needs, identifying transportation needs, some of these social determinants of health, feedback on staff and programming, employment outcomes, community integration and relationship highlights, housing and food security needs. So the possibilities are endless. The risks are high, but there's a smart and a right way to do this. And all of us, as you saw from that first graph, starting in December of 2022, entered a whole new world that happened faster than anybody expected it to, unless you were watching the Jetsons and expected Rosie to be here by now. Then it happened slower than you expected it to. But it's here and it's happening, and it's an exciting thing to watch. And we can tell from our news that we're definitely watching it. And we're excited to work with everyone here to help further your missions and support the people that you support in better ways, in safer ways. So thank you, everybody, for coming. And we're looking forward to questions. We do have some of the source materials that we use that are available here, and want to thank everybody for joining.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Doug, Joanne, thank you very much. A fantastic conversation, and just evident by the questions that came in, a very topical conversation. So thank you for that. A reminder to everyone who has joined us today, the recording of the webinar will be available on demand on our website over the next day or so. You should also be receiving an email thanking you for joining us, and with a link to that webinar once it's posted. So thank you again for joining us. Doug, Joanne, thank you, and have a wonderful rest of the week, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.